Hello, today we're going to talk about a Holley 650 double pumper. The carburetor is quite old. It was from the early 70s and it was used on various cars, but it doesn't have a lot of time on running. But it does have a lot of time sitting on the shelf, and there's corrosion is set in and all the gaskets have dried up, and it needs a major overhaul. I can overhaul it myself, but I don't have the equipment to do the job that I'd like to do, so I'm going to bring it to a remanufacturing plant, an outfit down in Jersey, and they're going to completely rebuild the carburetor and restore it, making it look real pretty as well as functioning properly. But the next part of this video will be after I get it back from the shop and what it looks like when they finish. I'm looking forward to a beautiful looking piece of equipment. Well, we got the carburetor back from Custom Rebuild Carburetors, and I'll tell you, it looks fantastic. I'm really pleased with the way it came out. I'm going to throw a couple of still pictures in and some before and after pictures of this carburetor, just so you can compare what it looks like now as to what it looked like before I sent it down. Here, let me just turn this around, and you can see the carburetor is absolutely beautiful. Now it's going to go on a small block Chevy 388 stroker. Let's just hope it runs as good as it looks. If it does, that's going to be one good running carb and good running engine. There's quite a difference between the before and after photos. I'm really pleased with the way this is coming out. Let's briefly review the features that I mentioned. This is a 650 dual feed double pumper Holley carburetor, and by 650 they're referring to the amount of air that can go through the carburetor in 1 minute, and it's in cubic feet, so 650 CFM is the size of the carburetor. As far as the dual feed, you've got a front and a rear bowl. Each has its own individual feed line, and here's a typical feed line that they would put in. I don't want to block it, but this, you can see, get the idea. The feed line would go in this way, and you would have a T external to the carburetor. Holley does make carburetors with an internal feed line as part of the carburetor that would go from the front to the rear bowl, and those would be single feed. You would only have a single line going in. Now we talk double pumper, and we're looking at the right side of the carburetor, and this is the secondary bowl, and right here is your secondary accelerator pump. Standard carburetors do not have accelerator pumps on secondaries, but they do on the dual feed double pumper because it has a mechanical secondary. We turn the carburetor around, and here's your primary accelerator pump, and here's your throttle. And when you open your throttle, your mechanical secondaries open up the secondaries. On the other side, that double pumper dumps fuel into the secondaries. This dumps it into the primaries. You know, the car really should jump and take off. The next thing I wanted to mention is the mechanical secondaries, which is this carburetor. There's a second type. It's called a vacuum secondary, and you have this housing contains a diaphragm, and here's your diaphragm. Okay, and that diaphragm works off a vacuum. Vacuum is drawn through the housing, and this attaches to your secondary throttle shaft, and that's what opens your secondaries. It's a good system. It's a different system. It's better for the automatics and the manual shifts. So that's just another type of carburetor that they make. We talked about dual feed. Remember, I haven't seen a 4-barrel Holley that didn't have two bowls, a front and a rear. They do make the Holleys where the front and rear bowl have an internal connection, a tube that runs from the front to the rear. so that you feed the rear bowl from the front bowl. Those exist, and those are usually the smaller CFM carburetors, 600 and lower. I think they do make a 650 with a single feed, but when you start getting to the larger carburetors, the 650s, 700s, up through the Dominators, they're dual feed bowls because they demand more fuel.
A question that often comes up is, does the carburetor meet the requirements of the engine that you're going to put it on? And carburetor sizing is very important. You have to match it for your application. To do that, you need to determine the CFM requirements of the engine. And there's a formula that can be used that'll tell you exactly what size carburetor you really need. And that is the application percentage, whether it's a street or race carburetor application, the maximum RPM of the engine, the displacement in cubic inches of the engine, divided by a constant. And for the application percentage, we put in 85% for street and 110% for racing. So if we work the formula through down here on the bottom, 85% times 6,700 RPMs times 388 cubic inches divided by the constant, which is 3456, gives you 639 CFM. Now, the engine that I have in mind to put this carburetor on is a Chevrolet Stroker, 388 cubic inches, capable of pulling 6,700 RPM. And it's going to need 639 CFM of carburation. We have a 650 CFM carburetor from Holley. Looks like a real good match. However, if we were going to go in for a racing application, we'll work the formula out at the bottom at 110%. You see it's 827 CFM. So we put an 800, let's say an 850 CFM carburetor on there, and that would be for the racing application. So why don't we do that for the street? Well, it's very simple. The street carburetor application gives you bottom end. You want power and bottom end on the street. You want a good street performance car. You don't want to have it bogging at traffic lights and so forth. And on the other hand, if you have a racing application, you want your power top end. By increasing that carburetor to 850 CFM at high RPMs, that engine will be putting out more horsepower. But that's not where you need the horsepower on the street. You want your horsepower down at the end, at the bottom end of the engine. So, for this application, the 650 CFM carburetor is a good match, and it should work out very well. I just wanted to express the importance of working out this calculation if you're doing an engine or want to select a carburetor. If you have any questions about how this formula is derived, or questions about the numbers, you can leave me a message on the video, and I'll be happy to respond. Thank you. Well, for the next part, we're going to talk about putting the carburetor on the engine. We're just going to talk about it. I'm going to tell you what to do or what should be done, not necessarily how to do it. There's a lot of good videos out there by Summit Racing, and also there's videos through Holley. They give you specifics on how to check your tuning of your carburetor, and what you need to do is to look at those videos for specific tuning applications. But the first thing we want to mention is when you install your carburetor, it's going to be empty, of course, and you can crank it with the fuel off, or there's a way people even fill the bowls a little bit through here to get this thing started. Once you get it started, you immediately want to check for leaks. If you have any leaks, correct them before you proceed. Of course, it only stands to reason. But the first thing you want to do when you start your engine is to just give it a very rough idle adjustment so that it runs okay. It's not running real fast or real slow. You can tune it by ear just to get it running. Once you get that, shut it down,
and check your bowl levels. These are the sights for the bowl levels. This is the adjustment for your needle and seat. And as I said, there's good videos on how to do these adjustments. Watch those videos, make your adjustments, and get your bowl levels set. You want that done first. Once the bowl levels are set, then start it back up. Now you can do a little bit of fine tuning on your idle. And these are idle mixture screws. You have one here and one on the other side. Here's a metering plate that we have, and you can see there's an idle adjustment screw on each side of these. Some don't have idle adjustment screws. Those are the secondaries. Primaries have the idle adjustment screws. So you want to work with this, work with your main idle adjustment screw, which, let me just turn it around here because it's on this side, because you can't, okay. There's a screw, let me just take this, okay, there's a screw back here, and we'll see if you can see it. It's right here. This is just to set your idle adjustment. That opens and closes your throttle shaft. As I said, these are idle mixture screws here on the primary, and you may have noticed idle mixture screws on the secondary here. This particular carburetor does not have idle adjustment ports for the secondary, but the metering block does. So these are just screwed into the bottom, and they're out of the circuit. Same thing, I'll talk later about a power valve. This doesn't have a power valve. This is blocked off. This just has what they call a power valve plug, or just a plug. As I said, there's plenty of videos on how to set the idle, and you can follow those instructions and get that set up. The next thing you want to check when you, back up just one second. When you do your idle adjustment, I suggest you use a vacuum gauge. You can use a tachometer with a very low scale, but your vacuum gauge is the best way to check your adjustment. Besides, you're going to want a vacuum reading. Your vacuum reading will tell you how to size your power valve. I'll get to that in a minute. So you have your vacuum reading. Now you want to check your accelerator pump. Make sure it's set up properly. And that's very simple. You use a feeler gauge, and you open your throttle and you use a 15 thousandths feeler gauge. Make sure it works okay. Make sure there's no play down here. It doesn't go up and down. And there's a good video on how to specifically do that. So now your power valves are adjusted and your idle is adjusted. One thing I didn't tell you, don't adjust the idle with the engine cold. Make sure it's good and warmed up with a good running temperature. Then before you adjust your idle, otherwise things will get messed up. So once you've got your idle adjusted properly, these are adjusted properly. Now you can take it for a ride. You should know what size power valve. I got a power valve here, and I couldn't show you in the video, but if you take I need a magnifying glass sometimes to read them, but you have a number on the power valve. That'll tell you the power valve size. It could be a 6.5, it could be a 7. This particular power valve is a 4.5. I think it might be a little bit too low a number for this particular application. We'll find out once I start it and drive it. And if it needs to be changed, I can put a power valve with a higher number in there. But this is your power valve. It's located, again, in your block. This is your metering block. And it's on this carburetor, it's only on the primary side. Screws in here. This goes against the carburetor base, and the bowl hangs off the other side of it over here. Okay? And you just want to make sure your power valve matches your vacuum. If you have a vacuum of, let's say, 14, maybe a little bit more, which would be with a mild cam or intermediate cam, your power valve should be half of that. So 6.5 to 7 would be what you would want to size your power valve at. And again, There's videos on how to do that. One thing is, you try one. If you have to tweak it a little bit, you may want to change your power valve up or down and to get it to run the best. The other thing are your jets. Now, on both the primary and secondary, you have these little jets. These are 72s. They just happen to be number 72s. The jet number tells you the flow rate. It doesn't mean anything to do with drill size, but you're going to want to basically start off with the factory settings. The same thing with the power valve. Start off with the factory settings and make minor adjustments up or down depending on the needs of the engine. To tell if you have good jet sizing, you have to read the plugs. And again, there's nice videos on how to read spark plugs. You drive the car a little bit and read the plugs and determine if your jets are working properly. The other thing that I wanted to mention is these idle mixture screws. When you start off, I said I didn't tell you how to do it, but you don't start off with them screwed all the way in, usually about 2 turns out. You should be able to kill the engine by screwing these in. If you can't kill the engine by screwing these in and starving it for fuel and causing the engine to die, you've got a problem. Your problem could be, number one, they call it a blown out power valve. That could happen, where you could tighten these up, engine won't die. Or if you have a radical cam, it's very possible it's running, you have to have your idle mixture or your idle screw cranked up too much to give you too much throttle to where you're beyond the idle circuits. In that case, there's adjustments you can make on the secondaries to give it more air. There's also, somebody said in one of the videos, you can drill holes in your butterflies to allow for more air. But this is more for a racing application than a street application. You shouldn't be into this with a street application. And I don't recommend drilling the holes unless you really, really know what you're doing. I mean, you could just ruin something there. And so now once you get everything tuned in properly, you should have a good running car and so forth. The other adjustment, okay, which we will talk about, remember earlier I talked about your vacuum secondaries. If you have that carburetor equipped with one of these housings with a vacuum secondary, they have different springs for this. And depending on how soon or how late this thing operates, you can change these springs and tune your vacuum secondaries in to work properly to give you the best results. Again, there's a neat video on how to do that. He puts this fellow Norm from Summit Racing puts a paper clip on there, and the vacuum pulls it up, and you can figure out if it's fully opening your secondaries and so forth. It's a pretty neat thing. So you might want to look at those videos if you have vacuum secondaries. Look at the videos on how to do your idle adjustments. And once you get the thing set up, it should run fine until you want to do maybe some minor tuning. Generally, if you were to go out and get one off the shelf, a brand new carburetor, put it on your car, you have your CFM matched to the engine, you're in pretty good shape. And you should have very little adjustments of your power valves, maybe small adjustments of your jets, a little bit of tuning with your idles, but that's about all you should have to do. This is for street application. For racing applications, however, they get into some really exotic adjustments. For example, some of the exotic adjustments you can have. This up on top, and I hope it should come out, this is your squirter. When your accelerator pump opens, it squirts fuel in. This is the secondary, but it squirts the fuel in to the carburetor as you open your throttle. They have a variety of sizes and shapes of these squirters. You can change those. Another thing you can change, if we look down here, see if we can get this picture underneath, you can see
the bottom of the accelerator pump, which is connected to the lever, they have different size bowls for that. You can go to a, what I think it's 50 cc bowl, which would hold a lot more fuel. So you would be pushing a lot more fuel in. Again, this is for racing. This would not be for you if you just want a street application. Another thing which I think we're going to have a difficulty, there's a cam. See if I can get you to see this. I don't think you can, but right here on the shaft there's a nylon or a plastic cam, and they come in a variety of sizes of lift and duration, so you can change your cam on your accelerator pump. So here these guys are racing. They changed the cams, they changed the bowl size, they changed the jets or the squirters. They have, I start talking about changing jets. They could be racing the car in the afternoon, and then they come evening, they rejet the carburetors based on the temperature of the engine. You're not going to do that with a street car, but just to give you some idea of the flexibility of adjustments on this carburetor. Next thing we're going to do is actually put this carburetor right on the car and see how it runs and take it for a test ride. I've decided before I put the carburetor on the engine, there's something I want to do, and that's to change out the fuel bowl gaskets. I've already done it, but I've got some old ones here to show you why. This is a non-stick gasket, and this is the same gasket, but this is what was on the carburetor, and we have these 4 gaskets here. And what I wanted to do was replace the standard gaskets with the non-stick. We're going to be tuning the carburetor. Probably the bowls will come apart, maybe changing jets, changing power valve to get this thing dialed in properly. And to dial this in and to take it apart, these are the gaskets you'll want. The other gaskets can stick. If these were to be on there and they stick and tear, now you're in trouble. So I bought a set of gaskets. They cost about $11 and something. And you can pick them up. And down the road, if I go to change gaskets, I'll have no trouble. If you're at the racetrack and you're a racer, these are a must. You know, if you want to change jets between runs or something, you have to have the non-stick gaskets, because you could be at the track and it could just ruin your day. The other thing I wanted to mention is the fuel bowls have the capacity for filters. Now this is the filter. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put it up here on the carburetor. Yeah, you can see that filter pretty good. It's a brass filter, and it fits up in here. It's backed up by a spring, and let's see if I can. This is the end that would face down. Your spring would be behind, and check your carburetor. If you don't have these in there, go out and buy a kit. You know, here's the kit. You get the two gaskets. You get gaskets for it. You get the 2 filters and the spring. They need to go into your carburetor. I suggest you get them. Anything gets in there, even if you have an inline filter, which you should have. These are an additional protection. So we're going to put the carburetor on the engine and see how it runs, and see if we can dial this in to really make a nice running car. The shop that restored the carburetor is Custom Rebuilt Carbs at www.customrebuiltcarbs.com. This is the Corvette that carburetor is going to be going on. It's a 388 stroker. Just to reiterate, she makes a lot of horsepower, and it's a good running engine. With this Holley dual feed double pumper, we should have an awful lot of fun. So our next video will be the installation of the carburetor and some test rides to see how this car performs with the Holley.